This happened just last year. My buddy Jimmy is pretty involved and well connected within the music community. By music community, I'm more specifically referring to the dance/electronic music scene all along the East Coast, predominantly New Jersey and New York. It's actually pretty impressive what he and his team have been able to accomplish in just 2 years. The general gist is this: their company hosts what they call events at high-profile venues, typically the most well-known club or party space in whatever city they happen to be in. Then they outsource the talent, which, mind you, is typically a very well-known and sometimes borderline famous DJ. I'm not too involved or invested in that scene, so I'm not exactly sure who they've gotten to perform, but I will tell you that there have been some huge names in the mix. But enough context. Jimmy and I go way back. I'm talking 20 plus years. I've basically known him my entire life, and he's been my best friend for damn near most of it. Because of that, he lets me, along with a bunch of our other hometown friends, come to his shows for free and hang out with the talent in the VIP section. It's actually really cool, and something I wish I expressed my gratitude for more often. Jimmy was scheduled to host a huge event the weekend of July 4th on the Jersey Shore. It was going to be their biggest one yet, and all our mutual friends were going. Jimmy invited me to come down early with him, and I obviously obliged. The two of us made the hour-and-a-half drive with our other friend Ryan, and we found ourselves at the venue a good 4 hours before the doors opened. Ryan and I didn't have much to do while Jimmy and his team set up, so we decided to get a bit of a head start on the alcohol consumption. Jimmy and his team were entitled to as much free booze as they desired, compliments of the venue, and Ryan and I definitely took advantage of that. By the time the first DJ started his set, Ryan and I were more than a little buzzed, to put it mildly. It was 4th of July weekend after all, so we felt like our degenerate activities were justified. Fast forward a couple hours, and Ryan and I were completely wasted. I honestly don't remember a time since then when I was that drunk, not even close. Don't get me wrong, Ryan and I are grown men, we can handle our alcohol. Throwing up, making fools of ourselves wasn't the issue though. It was genuinely just the problem of having lower impulse control and worse decision making. But either way, we were having a great time, at least from what I can remember. The event was winding down, and it was getting to that point in the night where you either figured out how you were getting home or who you were going home with, or both. Jimmy had rented an Airbnb really close by and promised both Ryan and I a bed, so the first issue wasn't a concern. The second problem, though, that was what was on my mind. The two of us danced over to the bar and started talking to some girls we found attractive, and before long, we had figured out who we were going to spend the rest of the night with. Neither of us are Calvin Klein models, but we're both above 6 feet tall. For whatever reason, the vast majority of guys who hang around the Jersey Shore are usually shorter than average, so being tall is an even bigger boost than it usually is. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the main attribute most girls on the Jersey Shore seek out. Not looks, not build, not intelligence, but height. Don't ask me why. The Jerseyan female mind is still something I have yet to comprehend. I'm probably botching their names, but I'm fairly sure the two girls introduced themselves as Gianna and Marcela. Us meeting them coincides with where my ability to recall events precisely becomes a bit hazy, so there may be gaps in the story from here on out. From what I can remember, it was actually Marcela who suggested we all leave together and continue to party elsewhere, which Ryan and I weren't going to argue with. Gianna handed the two of us a drink and insisted that we get on their level before heading out, even though we had both probably consumed the fluid equivalent of her body weight in alcohol already. I know that whole dynamic. Girls getting guys drinks sounds a little unorthodox, and it is, but these girls were clearly wealthy given how they were dressed. After downing the drinks, the four of us started moving towards the venue's exit. The moment we stepped outside, Marcela suggested we go back to her place, which was pretty close by, and also right on the beach. Her saying that actually surprised me a little. I was fully anticipating going back to our Airbnb, considering the guys were usually the ones to host in situations like this. But both girls insisted that Marcela's beach house was definitely nicer than whatever inland Airbnb we found for the night. She had a point, so I didn't argue, and neither did Ryan. We walked along the beach, talking the whole time. The girls seemed really intelligent and knowledgeable based on the conversations we had, and I remember finding it so refreshing to talk about something other than nightlife and whatever other garbage I'm used to talking to girls about for once. Not just girls, drunk people in general. At one point, I actually felt kind of embarrassed for being so drunk because I felt like I couldn't articulate myself well enough and looked like an idiot. That's when I realized I actually was feeling drunker than I had been 15 minutes earlier. But it wasn't a drunk I was used to feeling. I felt like my body was melting under my weight, as if I were going to collapse uncontrollably any second. My legs felt flimsy, almost like cardboard, if that makes any sense. Moving my limbs, mouth, and even my eyes became increasingly more difficult, and there was a moment where my extremities started feeling a little numb. But then, just as quickly as the feeling arose, it passed, back to normal drunkenness, at least for the time being. Just then, we arrived at the beach house. It was insane. I'm probably exaggerating because I was so drunk, but it looked like what I imagined a professional athlete's beach house to look like. We went inside, and after taking our shoes off, found ourselves in what I'm guessing was a living room. I say guessing because the level of opulence in there was just so foreign to anything I'm used to. It was decorative, but somehow minimalistic. Even those descriptions are opposite. There were honest-to-God sculptures on pedestals in there, but it didn't feel cluttered or overly showy, and everything on display seemed to blend right into the walls like they were just extensions of the room. I wish I had the wherewithal to take a picture, but again, my mind was elsewhere. Evidently, so was Ryan's, because not 15 minutes after stepping foot in the house, he and Marcela had disappeared somewhere in that maze of a house, which left me alone with Gianna. She leaned in to kiss me, and that's the last thing I remember before blacking out. Not her kissing me, but leaning in to kiss me. That's where everything cuts off. I don't remember feeling woozy again or drinking more or doing anything else, but there's a huge gap in my memory that spans several hours and will not come back no matter what I try. And the thing is, I know I didn't pass out because there are texts on my phone sent from me proving I was still conscious. There's digital proof that I was sentient, but I don't remember one bit of it. And before you say I just simply blacked out from alcohol, this was different. I rarely ever black out, but all the times I have, I can still remember bits and pieces of the night, scattered moments here and there, enough for me to string together a continuous sequence of events at the very least. Keep in mind, those were also all times where I was drunker than I was that night, so that's another reason I think a generic blackout isn't a reasonable explanation for what happened. Plus, Ryan experienced the exact same thing at essentially the exact same time, which is way too specific to be coincidental. Here's the next thing I remember. Waking up with the sun directly overhead in a random set of bushes over an hour away from where the event was. Something I didn't know yet because my phone wasn't in my pocket. In fact, nothing was in my pocket at all. Both my wallet and keys were gone, but it gets worse. It wasn't even my pocket to begin with. I was wearing someone else's clothes, and not Ryan's either, a complete stranger's. The only personal belonging of mine I still had in my possession was my shoes, and even those were messed up. Both shoes had the shoelaces removed and were soaking wet. My head was pounding, and everything felt disoriented, like I was waking up from anesthesia. I didn't even sit up right away. I just stared at the sky for a minute, trying to make sense of where I was. Bushes, someone else's clothes, no wallet, no phone, no keys. Based on my shoes, it was like I had been in the water recently, but I didn't smell like salt water or chlorine. The worst part about the whole thing was the blankness. I genuinely couldn't remember anything past Gianna leaving, like I already said. That's when the panic started to creep in. I wasn't just hungover, I was scared. I had no idea how I got there. What if I'd gotten into a fight or crashed a car? What if someone drugged me? I didn't have a single point of reference for the last 10 hours. I stood up and realized there wasn't a single landmark around me. It didn't look like a beach town, which also scared me. The road ahead just curved into more trees, but just across the street, maybe a few hundred feet away, was a 7-Eleven. It was genuinely the only thing in sight, so I headed straight for it. I asked the guy behind the counter if I could use his phone, telling him that mine had been stolen. He stared at me for a second, probably debating whether or not I was trying to scam him, but then he slid it across the counter. The first number that came to my mind was my sister's. It was the only number besides my mom or dad's I still memorized, and there was no way in hell I was calling my parents. My sister picked up right away, and I tried explaining things the best I could. She ended up giving me Ryan's number, which I ended up calling several times, but to no avail. That's when I started wondering if what had happened to me happened to him too. Drugged, robbed, dumped in some random bushes an hour away. I was just about to call the police, when what do you know, Ryan walks into the same 7-Eleven. We just stared at each other for a second before dabbing each other up. He then told me his version of things, and you guessed it, it was the same story, damn near exactly. That sealed it for us. We called the police, making sure to thank the 7-Eleven worker profusely. Fast forward a few minutes, and we're now recounting our story to the police outside the store. To their credit, they took everything we said seriously, at first. But the more we told them, the more their questions started turning. Were we sure we didn't just drink too much? Maybe we wandered off and passed out somewhere. They weren't accusing us outright, but it was clear they weren't entirely convinced something criminal happened. I told them it was unlikely we would have drunkenly wandered into a town an hour away by foot, and I don't think they liked that remark very much. I gave them my sister's number and asked them to call her. She was already tracking my phone through Find My iPhone. To all of our collective surprise, my phone was showing up in the middle of a parking lot a few minutes' drive away. The officers agreed to drive us, and sure enough, both our phones were sitting on the pavement next to each other. While it was great to have my phone back, that only affirmed the police's theory that we had just been drunk. They started saying that we probably hadn't even been robbed, that we had lost our wallets the same way we had lost our phones. We tried convincing the police to check out the house Marcela brought us to, the one she claimed was hers, but they weren't having it. They told us we were probably just too drunk and didn't remember things correctly. One of them even said, "Happens more than you think." Then they gave us their cards and told us to call if we remembered anything else. It was actually shocking how reluctant they were to even connect us to other officers that would be willing to help. They told us to find a ride home since our phones were still charged, and they just left us there. After they left, I went through my phone for the first time, and things got even weirder. There were texts sent from me to a ton of people I knew. Jimmy, my parents, a few coworkers, even some girls I had been talking to. All normal sounding stuff. Stuff I might have said if I had actually had a calm, coherent night. The texts genuinely sounded like me, but from a continuity standpoint, they didn't make any sense when considered all together. One message to Jimmy thanked him for the event and said we'd crashed at a buddy's place. One to my dad said we were safe and had found a couch to sleep on. There was another to a girl I'd been texting that just said something casual, like I was hanging out at home and thinking about her. None of those texts made any sense, and mostly contradicted each other. I realized I had a ton of missed calls and texts from Jimmy, so I called him. He sounded relieved to hear from me, saying he thought Ryan and I had died or something. He told us to stay put, he'd come pick us up. In the meantime, Ryan and I canceled all our cards, but interestingly, none of them had been used, despite the likely fact that they had been in those girls' possession for several hours. The entire ride home, we talked non-stop about what could have happened. None of it made any sense. Yeah, we had been drugged, that much was clear, but that didn't explain things. First of all, I don't know of any kind of roofie that has those effects, like an induced blackout. Everything I've read just said those drugs make you fall asleep, but again, I was conscious, as the texts confirm. Plus, why go to such lengths just to rob two random guys? Especially if you weren't going to at least even attempt to use their credit cards. Two guys who walked up to you, no less. And in such a risky place, too, your own house. Or was it a house they had broken into? Both were equally risky. Jimmy thought we had been targeted, but like I just said, we had been the ones to approach the girls, so we couldn't have been targeted. And all this isn't even mentioning how or why we miraculously found ourselves in a random town an hour away wearing other people's clothing. As crazy as it sounds, both Ryan and I checked ourselves for incisions, thinking maybe some of our organs had been harvested, but there was nothing. Jimmy suggested that maybe they had just given us some exotic drugs, which I guess makes sense, but someone had driven us to that town, and someone other than those girls had switched clothes with us. We never got an answer, but it's not like we just forgot about the whole thing. Ryan and I ended up driving all the way back to the shore just to go looking for that house. We tried our best to retrace our steps, knowing that if we just walked along the boardwalk, we'd eventually find the house, since it was on the beach. And we actually did find it. The two of us walked up the walkway and rang the doorbell. An older man opened the door, asking us what we wanted. I did the talking. Not wanting to reveal too much or potentially incriminate myself, I simply asked him if a girl named Marcela lived here, or if he had a daughter or granddaughter around our age. He gave me a hard no, and I made up some BS story that there was a girl who lied about owning this house, which she actually found pretty funny, then that was that. I would be lying if I said I didn't walk away from that house with a sick, unsettling feeling in my stomach. I can't even describe it as fear, just a sickening discomfort, like something truly awful had happened to me and my friend that night, and I'd never get to the bottom of it. For a long time after that, I was convinced those girls had been involved in something much, much bigger that neither me nor Ryan could even conceive. That maybe they had been planning to kidnap or kill us, and decided not to go through with it at the last second for whatever reason. I know I'll never have an update, but if something else happens, I'll definitely send something. This happened a decent while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years have passed to the point where I feel safe talking about it. I was fresh out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses since I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without having to worry about food or a place to sleep, and all the while having full access to the room I grew up in, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who allowed me to stay at home and rent-free. I know a lot of people don't have that option, so it's something I never took for granted, but not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to tell you happened not even 1 month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age like to call a party girl. I don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, I don't spend every ounce of my free time at clubs, and I definitely don't allow men to dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, go to the gym, read a bit of my book at home, mess around on my phone, and go to sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide I want to spend my time doing. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other 2 friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from the way Lindsay talked about it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from the touristy chaos on its own private beach, and just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I had a feeling her beach house would be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was awestruck. Look, I'm no architect, but I know a modern style house when I see one, and Lindsay's must have been ultra modern because it looked more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show you guys pictures of it, believe me, I've got plenty, but out of respect for Lindsay's family, I think that would be in really poor taste, even if what I'm about to tell you didn't happen. The 4 of us unloaded our stuff and decided where we'd be sleeping. Lindsay obviously had enough individual bedrooms for all of us to occupy, but what would be the fun in that? Instead, the 4 of us stayed in the same room, one of the kids' bedrooms that had 2 sets of bunk beds and its own attached bathroom. We'd been staying there 3 nights, which, in my opinion, is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than your family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who's not clean or polite tends to tick me off pretty easily. Not that any of my friends are, but you know how it is. I know I told you about my relatively boring lifestyle already, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned on letting loose a little more than I ordinarily would. We wanted to keep the first night pretty chill though, so we walked down to the private beach connected to the house and sat in the sand, stargazing. The 4 of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. It was this faint, flickering light emanating from somewhere further down the shore. The 4 of us quieted down a bit and watched the light flicker on and off. The sight was kind of hypnotic, as eerie as it was. After a while, it became clear that the light was swinging back and forth, like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with. And soon after, we realized that's just what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually walking in our direction, not running or stumbling or moving strangely, but strolling at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing the sound of laughter, which caused all of us to relax a bit. Considering how late it was most likely just a group of teenagers or even people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point, one of them yelled out hi in a friendly voice. It was a guy's voice, and he sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made some small talk while they made their way over to us. As they approached, we could see that it was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than we were. They all had that typical beach boy look, which I could tell right away my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I can't say I was too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so it's not like I'm saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but they weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they ultimately invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and was leaning towards going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to continue hanging out with the boys, especially Thea, of course. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys after all, and I had no intention of hooking up with anyone that night. I walked back towards Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably towards wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered her in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me up instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words were like a bucket of ice-cold water being splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I quickly threw on some clothes and sprinted down the stairs. I asked her why she had called me instead of the police, and she reassured me that she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instruction, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in a matter of minutes. She told me they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and told me what direction it had gone in, and I slammed on the gas to try and catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. It was a miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes of driving, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. Then I hung up the phone, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance so as not to alert them to the situation, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead of me didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine that they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled the car over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint. They put them in cuffs and escorted them back to one of the cruisers. Then, one of the officers walked over to the trunk of the car and pulled it open to reveal both Thea and Sabrina, bound, and from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the whole experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events told from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this, by the way. We're still close in contact, so I obviously asked them. But none of them wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, since she was trying to be at least a little responsible given it was her family's house we were staying in. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were with suggested they all go to bed. So the 4 of them split off while Lindsay told the 3rd guy she was going home. He was really upset about that, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down but had to watch her house, and he got angry. They yelled at each other for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get the hell out of his house and never come back, which she was more than happy doing. Halfway home though, she realized she had forgotten her purse, so she went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do 2 things: keep the event as far away from the public sphere as possible, and make sure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by some random old couple who were on vacation in a different country. That, plus the slew of other crimes they were charged with, put them away for a long time. Although I still think there's no sentence long enough that can properly compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talking to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a little, but luckily that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this incident affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels like not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part about the whole thing is the fact that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time. And had it not been for that, the police may have never found those guys' car. It's 2016. Our new neighbors invite our family over for a nighttime barbecue. My mom and my dad and my sister and I meet in their backyard at like 8 o'clock. This is the first time that I personally meet them. It's just a husband and wife and a teenage boy. I quickly learn the boy's name is Jeremy. The husband seems to be the nicest of them all. There's something cold about the wife, and the son Jeremy seems to have some kind of mental or social issues because he won't talk at all. He constantly looks all over the place, and he seems to be really sad or gloomy. I also catch him staring at me a few times. Each time I grow increasingly uncomfortable around him and try even harder not to look at him anymore. After eating a burger and hot dog each, our parents pretty much talk to his parents. I wait a little bit before sneaking back to our house because I was bored and uncomfortable. The next day on my walk to school, since I live 2 blocks away from the high school, I turn my head around a few houses after passing our neighbor's house and see someone jump behind a tree as if to be hiding. I turn back in front of me and start to walk faster. I get to the last block before the school and turn around again. This time I see the same person hiding in a bush in front of someone's house. It's Jeremy. I can tell by his long hair, and he's looking right at me. I walk as fast as I can without running, and make it to the school safely a minute later. When I get home that day, I tell my parents, and they go over and talk to the neighbors. When my parents come back to talk to me, I learn from them that Jeremy is apparently not like the other kids, according to his parents word for word. That also seemed to be enough explanation for my parents to tell me to just ignore him, as if him following me to school wasn't an insanely creepy thing to do. Later on, I go outside to sit on the patio and do my homework, and just as Jeremy and his creepiness come to mind, I turn to look at the neighboring house, up at the only window that overlooks our backyard. And there he is. Jeremy is sitting at that window looking at me, but as he notices me, he quickly hides. I run inside and tell my parents, and they once again quote what his parents said and tell me not to worry about him. Later that night, after texting friends and whatnot in bed, I finally put my phone down on the desk and roll on my side to go to sleep. A certain amount of time that I can't remember passes before I hear a click at my window, and then suddenly my window slides open. Without even knowing who's there, I scream at the top of my lungs, and soon my parents come rushing inside, all while I'm pressing up against the wall in shock as someone climbs through my window into my room. My parents turn on the lights, revealing Jeremy holding a large kitchen knife. Everyone screams, including my father, as he comes and grabs me to pull me out of the room. The 4 of us all rush to the neighbor's house to tell them. The man next door leads us into our own house and grabs his son when he finds him in the living room. He snatches the knife from his hands and tugs him out of the house. My dad sends all of us inside as he stays outside screaming at the man next door. Moments later, he comes back inside and calls the police to get a restraining order. My dad promised those neighbors a living hell if they were not moved out by the next week. The police come and take Jeremy away, probably to some kind of place for people with mental disabilities, not a regular jail. Moving along to a week later, Jeremy didn't stay in that house anymore. We don't know where he stays now, but we've never seen him since. I wouldn't call myself a very active person, but I do enjoy working out and running every now and then, to stay in somewhat good shape. My friend Jay and I usually work out and run together, as Jay is always in shape and kind of trains me, if you will. Jay and I would often run late at night in my neighborhood since most of it is well lit, and I live in a decent area. However, we stopped running in my neighborhood 2 months ago after this happened. The way my neighborhood is laid out is that there's a main road that connects to separate roads branching off, but ultimately they all connect back to the main road, which leads to a dirt path extending into local farms and larger properties. This is important to understand the situation Jay and I were in. One night, we decided to run from my house onto a path that goes through the woods to one of the roads that branches off from the main road in my neighborhood. We planned to use that road to reconnect to the main road, then continue running to the dirt path before heading back to my house using the main road. I know it sounds confusing, but we took this unusual route to maximize the miles we could run, as our usual path, just running on the main road and back, was getting too easy for us. The run started as usual, with Jay and me running from my house to the path, talking about high school drama as we ran. However, we soon began to hear footsteps behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it since the path we were running on was frequently used, and we often saw other runners or people using it to cross from one area to another in the neighborhood. But as we continued, the footsteps remained behind us, mirroring our speed. When we picked up the pace and ran quickly, the footsteps followed suit. When we slowed down to a jog or walk for a moment, so did they. At this point, Jay and I were obviously a bit nervous and freaked out, but we were almost to the well-lit road. When we finally exited the path onto the road, we looked back and saw no one behind us. We both exchanged the same what the f*** look and decided it was probably just another runner trying to keep their distance from us. We continued onto the side road that led to the main road of my neighborhood and followed the main road all the way to where it turned into the dirt path. At this point, we were both still feeling good and decided to push on, running further down the dirt path. However, unlike the main road, this path had no streetlights and was lined with trees, creating an ominous atmosphere at night. Jay and I ran about a mile down this road before deciding to turn back. As we turned, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure quickly darting into the trees on the left side of the road. This immediately reminded me of the footsteps from earlier, and I began to feel noticeably uneasy. I told Jay that I had seen a figure jump into the trees along the path that we needed to take back. He dismissed it, saying I was just being paranoid and seeing things because of how far we'd run. I almost believed him and started doubting myself, so we began making our way back to my house. We ran past the spot where I had seen the figure with no issues, but just as we were about to reach the main road again, we heard rustling about 20 feet behind us in the trees. We turned around and saw a figure standing in the middle of the dirt road. The figure was facing away from us and was dressed in a black hoodie, along with very ripped and dirty khaki pants and black shoes. At this moment, I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. It felt like my heart was going to fly out of my chest. It was beating that hard. Jay looked at me, then back at the figure, and said, "What the hell are you doing?" but stopped mid-sentence when we both heard the person start laughing. It was an awful, cackling, cringe-inducing laugh. Then, as we stood frozen, the person turned to look at us, still laughing, before suddenly stopping. Now, he just stared at us with a glare that still haunts me to this day. His wide eyes and pale face burned into my memory. Jay and I exchanged one last look before running faster than we had ever run in our lives, sprinting the entire 2 miles back to my house. As we ran, we heard that terrible laugh again behind us, which only made us run faster. When we finally got back to my house, I threw up, then rushed inside through the back door, locking every entrance and shutting my garage doors. We sat there panting, still processing what had just happened, and swore never to run in my neighborhood at night again. If you're a night runner, always stay in well-lit areas and bring a friend, just to be safe.
It was a typical boring day in calculus, only it was Friday, 7th period, meaning the week was almost over and spring break would finally be upon us, so everybody was getting antsy in their seats, I could tell. We didn't have a test that day like a lot of my friends did with their other teachers, so our teacher in the middle of class just decided to start playing games with us on Sporkle.com. He was a very laid-back teacher like that. As we were doing some brand logo quiz on Sporkle, I remember the exact moment it happened. Right after my friend answered a question, I remember the exact answer too, Adidas. The dean's voice came through the loudspeaker. He sounded panicked and frantic as he told all the teachers this was not a drill and to go into lockdown. I actually got the chills, and I got goosebumps on my arms as our usually laid-back teacher too seemed panicked as he ran to turn off the lights and ushered us to the back corner of the room. We all sat in silence for about 2 minutes, and then the usual buzzing that came from a panel in the back of the room ceased, indicating that the school must have cut all the power. We all looked at each other, realizing this must be serious. A few more minutes of waiting later, we heard a man screaming at the top of his lungs coming down the hallway. 2 girls in the class actually started crying, which made all of us even more scared. As the screaming got closer to the classroom, the lunatic-sounding man started banging on the lockers while screaming, "I'll kill all of you." It was at that moment that I started to fear for my life. My teacher shushed us as we all looked at each other to see our peers' reactions. The banging then moved from the lockers to our classroom door. And that's when one of the crying girls screamed no. The banging on the door only grew worse as the man started screaming, "Open up." 2 of the girls in the class were crying out loud now. It felt like an eternity that man was pounding at the door, but eventually he finally continued down the hallway, screaming like a mentally insane person until we could not hear him anymore. I'd say 10 minutes later, though it felt like half an hour given the situation, the dean came back on the loudspeaker explaining the situation, which was surprising for him to do. He explained that some apparently mentally unstable person entered the building and assaulted the woman sitting at the front desk, causing her to flee the building screaming, and staff wasn't sure if the man was armed or not. Now, this was before the school had cameras or could afford proper security, so the school was wide open to something like this happening. The staff had done a sweep of all the hallways and classrooms and couldn't find him, so the dean instructed the teachers to resume teaching but to keep all the doors locked and to not let any students leave for any reasons. The most disturbing part, however, is that one of the janitors working the night shift found the man sleeping in one of the storage closets near the back end of the school, and according to rumors that were spread by my peers, sticking out of his pocket was a .44 Magnum. The janitor must have done something stupid to wake him up, for example, leaving the closet door open, because by the time a police officer could arrive on the scene, the man was gone. My entire class, as far as I know, to this day, has no idea if this man was ever found, but I like to think that right now, he's being given the proper help that he needs. As a former Uber driver, I've dealt with a whole bunch of unpleasant characters, from the drunken groups of friends on Saturday nights, to the people who pretend to be handicapped to get free rides. But every so often, you may pick up somebody who can just be classified as a straight-up creep. I've picked up a few of these guys, but never one quite as bad as a guy named Tom. It was a Friday night in December, one of the coldest nights of the year. I had nothing to do, so I figured I'd do some late-night pickups. This was 2 years ago. I was 18 and had a new Honda Accord. My parents kinda spoiled me a bit. I was a very skinny 18-year-old though. That's why my dad told me to always keep a blade in my car, because you never know what kind of nuts are getting into the car. A guy named Tom popped up a couple miles away by a major shopping area. I responded to his request and started driving in that direction. I pulled up in front of the shopping center where I saw a group of teenagers hanging out. It looked like trouble. I hoped this Tom guy wasn't part of this group. A bunch of them looked at me in my car as I slowly passed. Eventually I just hit the gas and went further into the parking lot of the shopping center, wanting to get away from this group. I did 2 laps around the whole parking lot until I finally noticed through my left mirror somebody approaching my car from behind. I rolled down my window and called out Tom, and he called back yes. I told him to hop in. I had to repeat myself 3 times, and given that all I was saying was hop in very clearly, made the situation very weird from the start. The 4th time he finally understood me and walked slowly around the back, getting into the seat right behind me. Usually the people I picked up would sit diagonally from me, which is what I preferred. When people sat right behind me, it just made me a little paranoid sometimes, especially when the person seemed kinda creepy. This guy was old. He had to be in his upper 40s. "Where to?" I asked him. He told me an address, which I entered into my phone. By his voice, I could tell he was a very heavy smoker. Come to think of it, my car was starting to smell like cigarettes too. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine, since it meant I'd be making more money. I tried making small talk initially, which didn't work out too well. Like if I would ask him a yes or no question, sometimes he would just mumble, and any other questions led to dry responses. I stopped talking when he completely ignored one of my questions. That was within just 5 miles. There was still 5 to go. By the 6-mile mark, things started getting uneasy in there. I was afraid to look into the rearview mirror because I was so sure that he was staring at me. I took a quick half-second glance and saw I was right. He was in fact staring at me. My body forced my foot down heavier on the gas. I wanted this ride to be over sooner. By the 8-mile mark, I started to realize we were in the middle of nowhere. We were on basically a deserted street with woods on either side and occasional buildings. I was growing suspicious now as to where this address he told me actually was. So, while driving, I dragged my finger across my phone to slide the map in the direction of the address. It seemed to lead to a dead-end street with no surrounding streets nearby. I was getting more and more nervous with each passing minute now. I shot a glance back up again at the mirror, and he was still watching me. I finally summed up the courage to ask him if the address he gave me was of his house. There was silence for a few moments, and I thought he was once again going to ignore me, or possibly didn't hear me. But 5 seconds later, he finally answered yes. There was less than a mile left in the drive now, still surrounded by nothing but woods with the occasional empty-looking building. I was approaching the dead-end street that the address he gave me resided on, hoping some houses would come into sight. As the street came up, I slowed down so I could get a good look of it. But nothing could be seen, just pitch blackness. I could only imagine why he wanted to get me out here alone, so far away from anybody or anything. I casually kept driving, pretending like I missed it, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. Instantly, he hopped out of his seat and yelled at me to turn around. Honestly, I felt like my life was on the line, so I apologized and did a quick 3-point turn. As I was reapproaching the dead-end street, I dug my hands into the netting compartment on the side of my seat where I kept my blade. I very quietly flicked the blade open and held it tight in my right hand, ready to use it. I turned down the dead-end road with my headlights now displaying just what I thought I would see. Nothing but trees on either side. I made it to the end of the road, not a single house or building on the road. I just knew something was about to go down. I was just trying to physically and mentally prepare myself for it. Suddenly he said in as soft as a voice as he probably could, "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even thinking about money at this point. He opened his door, but before stepping out, he said, "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." But he didn't have a bag. I knew he didn't. He didn't come in with one. I replied, Yeah, sure, let yourself out and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was too obvious. What happened next, I never imagined would have happened. All of a sudden, I felt pressure on my neck. It took me at least a second before I could realize he was choking me from the back seat. Immediately, I drilled the blade into his left arm and he screamed in pain, releasing his grip on my neck. He fell out of the car and onto the street, and I took that opportunity to turn the car around and practically floor it down the street until I returned to a busy road. I actually didn't end up calling the cops. I was just too scared to do anything but drive home. And by the time I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about it. Needless to say, I resigned from my Uber driving days after this incident.
I was 9 years old when this happened. For whatever reason, I was home alone one night, so I was playing video games upstairs in my room. I wasn't allowed to answer the door to anyone when I was home alone. Whenever I was left alone, it wasn't for long. My mom would just be out grocery shopping or something like that. I was playing Metroid Prime on my GameCube. I used to be obsessed with that game. I heard the house phone downstairs start to ring. My mom always told me to pick up the phone if it rang, in case it was her calling. So I hurried downstairs, and by maybe the 4th ring, I picked up. The caller ID was from my mom's cell phone. She said, "Sweetie, can you come outside and help with the groceries?" I replied, "Mom?" She said back, "Yes." I felt like something sounded off with her voice. You obviously know your own mom's voice, and so even at such a young age, when I was questioning why it didn't sound like her, I said, "Why do you sound like that?" She replied, "Like what, sweetie?" And I hung up. My mom would never use the word sweetie like that, especially twice in a matter of seconds. The phone rang again, and my mom's number came up on the caller ID again. I ignored it. For some reason, my heart was racing. I was nervous. I sat in the kitchen, waiting to see if the phone would ring a third time, and it did. It took a couple minutes before the third ringing, but when I checked the caller ID, this time it was a different number. I picked up, and a man's voice on the other end said, "Hey James, I know this is gonna sound weird, but it's your dad. I'm outside." All I could mutter out was a weak, "What?" The man said, "I'm outside. I have a lot to explain." I hung up right then and there. My dad died when I was 3. I have no memories of him. My suspicion was in fact true that the first voice I heard was not my mom's. The phone rang again, and then again after that. I ignored it each time. I couldn't even call my mom because someone clearly had her phone. Then things took a turn for the worse when there were knocks at the front door. This went from a "someone has my mom's phone" situation to a "someone is outside the house" situation. My mom would not be knocking on the door. She'd have a key, obviously. I peered around the wall of the kitchen to look at the front door. I heard a man's muffled voice on the other side saying my name. He was saying, "It's your dad." He rang the doorbell, and then I heard him start attempting to open the door. I did something that no 9-year-old should ever have to do, and that was grabbing the phone and calling 911. The 911 operator asked me what I imagined to be some pretty standard questions, most importantly telling me to wait in a bathroom or other room with a lockable door until the police get there. The bathroom is on the first floor of the house. I hid in there with the lights off. Whoever was outside came to the window and tried pulling it open. I heard their entire struggle. Then they must have moved to the next window. I think they tried every window and door in the house. If anything were to have been unlocked, this story would have had a very different outcome. They must have given up at some point before the police arrived. And I say they because clearly there were 2 people involved in this, a man and a woman. They both could have been out there for all I know. The operator told me that the police are at the front door now and it's safe to go meet them there. Only when I opened the door to the police was when I hung up the phone. They did a quick investigation inside and outside of the house and asked me where my mom was supposed to be and if my mom knew anyone who might want to hurt us. I'm sure I said I thought she was grocery shopping or something, and not that I know of. My mom returned home with my little sister in a panic when she saw the police cars out front. My mom's phone was stolen, which was already clear. I'm sure that our address, home phone number, and other personal information was stored somewhere on the phone, easily accessible, though how they knew my name, I'm not exactly sure. Something on my mom's phone must have given it away. It was an old Nokia flip phone. Who stole it was a mystery. But my mom's phone background was a picture of her with my little sister and I. This could have been an indication to some disgusting, creepy couple out there that the owner of this phone was a single mom with 2 young kids, and they tried to use that as a way of tricking me into leaving the house, which is absolutely disgusting and horrific. The phone must have been destroyed after the failed attempts at trying to lure me outside. Things were a little different after this. My mom wouldn't leave me alone anymore at night. Not until I was a few years older, at least.
Back in 2008, Cloverfield was one of the biggest movies of the year, and I desperately wanted to see it. Most of my friends had already gone to see it, which upset me given that I didn't want to be seen going to the movie theater alone. However, I didn't have work or school on Thursdays, so on Wednesday night, I figured I could get away with going alone to one of the small theaters nearby with a screening of the film at 9:30, since I knew it would be quiet. Well, I showed up, bought a ticket, and immediately realized the entire building was dead. I entered the theater, and much to my surprise, there was not a single person in there. There were 2 large sections of seats in the theater. I sat in the bottom row of the upper section, which was seated just behind a tiny wall. During the quiet parts of the movie, which were very few, I kept thinking that I was hearing something coming from behind me. It was almost like I was hearing a voice. Is someone there? Nothing. I felt like the sounds were just getting louder and closer, but I kept turning around and didn't see anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. Eventually, the sounds became so loud that it was evident it was a crazed whispering. I was about to nope the fuck out of there, but when I got up and took one last look behind me, a figure popped up quickly from behind the seats just 2 rows up from me, arms flat to their sides and just facing me like a stiff statue. I ran like there was no tomorrow back to the lobby, where I saw nobody, not a single employee. I kept running to the car, took a few seconds to catch my breath once inside, and drove back home. I tried calling the theater that same night. I never got anyone to answer. I didn't bother the next day, and I just tried to let it go. It still freaks me out beyond imagination to this day.
I once took a trek on the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, which is the longest hiking-only trail in the world. I went it alone just for fun. I went late in the fall though, so it was cold and there weren't many other people hiking. In fact, I think I only ran into like 2 other people going the opposite way. The part of the trail I was on was in thick forest, and it was definitely a scenic walk. The trail ran alongside a small river, and nothing could be heard but the sound of the flowing river and the early morning birds chirping. It was time for me to sit down and take a break, so I found a big rock sitting aside the river and sat down on it. I took a sip of my Gatorade, and then I could swear I was hearing a baby's cries coming from the distance. It was coming from further down the trail in the direction I was walking. Of course, I had to get up and follow the sound of it, because of that off chance that a baby was stranded in the woods alone. As I walked further down the trail though, it seemed like the baby's cries stayed the same distance away. This went on for like half a minute of walking fast before I gave up, and assumed it was somebody with a baby walking down the trail. I sat down on another rock I found on the side of the trail by the river. Eventually the crying seemed to just stop. Like it didn't fade away really, it just stopped abruptly. I sat on that rock for 5 minutes, just taking in the nature and taking a few videos on my phone. That's when I heard footsteps approaching nearby. Expecting to see another hiker walking the trail, I saw some frantic-looking woman hurrying over to me. She came so fast and so close that it actually scared me. She stopped uncomfortably close to my face and started screaming at me, "Have you seen my baby?" I calmly told her I heard a baby crying not too long ago, and told her to follow me. We walked quickly down the trail in the direction I was chasing the sounds of the baby earlier. I looked back every few seconds to make sure she was keeping up with me. Eventually I summed up the nerve to ask her how on earth she lost her baby, but she didn't answer. So I turned around again and stopped when I saw she was gone. And the weird thing, she was right on my tail just 10 seconds ago. I screamed out for her a few times, but the only sounds around me were the sounds of the birds chirping and the river. I figured even if she trailed off away from me, I would at least still be able to see her in the distance. I stood there for a long time deciding what to do next. Just move on with my life and continue the trail, or walk back and try to find this woman. I did one more quick 180-degree scan of the area we just came from, and what I saw next may not sound very disturbing, but it was disturbing to me in that very spot. I saw the woman standing across the river, arms hanging lifelessly at her sides, and she was looking at me, not saying anything, not moving a muscle, blank expression, just standing like a statue watching me. I had made up my decision right there, and that was to move the hell on with my life right there. I walked as fast as I could away from there until my calves hurt from walking so fast for so long. Eventually I made it back to my car after looping around another trail. I cut the hike short after what happened. I was truly unsettled by it and even started to question my sanity. Like, did that actually even happen? It seemed so unreal, and yet at the same time, it felt real in the sense that I lived it. I just want to know if anyone else who hiked the Appalachian Trail had any kind of freakish experiences like this.
The Wrong Hitchhiker by Nathan Bartholomew. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a route I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road. just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy, first of all. He seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and then slamming it back shut. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man. Let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them.
If you ever check your spam folder in your email, there's a chance at one point you received an email with one of your passwords in the title, and inside the email would be threats of leaking your information or worse unless you paid a certain ransom, usually in Bitcoin. This usually happens when a hacker, or even often a regular user, will likely find this info by merely searching any of the numerous data breach databases available on criminal forums. In March of 2019, a 25-year-old man named Joe Albanese received a similar email to what was just described. It was titled his password that he used for every account that he had. This was obviously a cause for alarm, so he opened it immediately to read the contents of the email. This is what it said. "Hey Joe, all you really need to know is that I know your password and other personal information. I won't come after you, I won't harm you, as long as you send me a small amount of money, $5,000 in the form of Bitcoin. We're going to refer to it as a donation for a good cause, not as any kind of blackmail. My Bitcoin address is... If you don't send me the money, bad things may happen. Don't even bother going to the police. This email is untraceable." Joe did some research and learned that these kinds of threatening emails are common scams, and usually nothing will come of them. Still, Joe replied to the email asking, "What other personal information of mine do you currently possess? I'd love to know." He sent this as a sort of challenge to the email, not even really expecting a response or for it to even go through. But it did, and he promptly received a response back saying, "I know your home address is F. If you go to the police, I will know about it and you will be sorry." This is when worry would really set in with just about anyone, as having a password leaked in a data breach is one thing, but some unknown person having your home address threatening you with it is completely next level. Joe didn't reply to the email for several days, but he also didn't go to the police. He decided to wait it out and see what would happen next, and after 3 days, there was a follow-up email saying, "I'm still waiting for the payment. I won't wait much longer." Joe replied this time saying, "I'm not paying you $5,000. If you want to come to my house, you'll get a face full of lead." This was a complete bluff though, as he doesn't actually own a gun, and the hacker likely knew that because that same night, Joe received a follow-up email containing a picture of his house. It was the side of his parents' house and zoomed in on his bedroom window upstairs. He didn't want to tell his parents in fear of worrying them, but now that his gun bluff didn't work, he knew he may have to get them or the police involved. He responded one more time saying, "I don't have $5,000. I'm broke paying off student loans. The house you sent a picture of is my parents' house. They did nothing wrong. If you need to do this, please do it to someone else. I don't have the money to send you even if I wanted to." There was no response this time, but within an hour, the sound of glass shattering from downstairs traveled throughout the house. And everyone, including his parents, heard it. There was one of their decorative bricks from the front of the house, laying in the dining room among thousands of tiny shards of glass from the broken window. Joe tried to explain the situation as quickly as he could, and while he and his dad took a quick look outside for anyone who could be out there, his mother called the police. Joe showed the police officers the emails and everything, which were forwarded to the police department. A police officer stayed parked outside the Albanese house for a couple hours that night. Joe blocked the email address from sending any further emails, and as far as he knew, he was never contacted again. The police had a hard time tracing back the original source of the email, as it was sent from an untraceable device, likely an iPod Touch or similar device. I'll never forget the first time I used Tinder. It was 2015 during winter break when everyone was back home from college. I figured since I didn't have a girlfriend and didn't have much going on, why not try the app that everyone was talking about? It was like 8 or 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, which was peak hours in terms of activity for the app. I downloaded the app onto my phone, and it was time to set up my profile. I spent a good 10 minutes browsing through my photo albums and found 4 flattering photos of myself that I thought would catch people's attention. I wasn't really experienced with the whole witty, funny Tinder bio thing that guys are apparently supposed to do, so I just wrote a few things about myself, like that I was 6 feet tall, played hockey at Penn State, and loved to work out. I swiped right for pretty much everyone just to see how many people would right swipe me back. I got through the given 100 likes quicker than I even expected, and didn't get a single match. My self-esteem was now completely in the toilet. I always thought of myself as really good looking, so I didn't understand how nobody could have liked me back. After waiting forever for some kind of notification to come up on my screen, I was considering just deleting the app to save my self-esteem. But finally, a single vibration from my phone, along with the message, "Congratulations, you have a new match," popped up on my phone. Overly excited, I went back into the app and saw that I had matched with the most gorgeous girl I'd seen on the app. She had 4 photos as well, one in a bikini with a friend, one with 2 girls kissing her on either cheek, one with her leaning on a brick wall, and one that appeared to be taken at a college frat party. She was 20 years old, just like me, and she went to Syracuse University. I messaged her just a plain old hey with a smiley face. 10 seconds later, she responded, "Hey cutie." I took a minute to think of something smart to say. Eventually, I wrote something about her sorority and that I had a friend in the same sorority at my school or something lame like that. She responded really quickly again, this time saying, "OMG, that's so cool," and then a smiley face. I was typing my response when she sent another message saying, "You're so cute and so close. What are you doing tonight?" At this point, I was excited and thought this app was easier than I thought it would be. I responded quickly saying, "Just watching Elf, you know, pretty exciting stuff." She replied back saying, "OMG, no way, me too. You should come over and we can watch it together," and then a winky face. I told her I was down and asked for her number. She gave it to me quickly, and I waited a minute before texting her just so I wouldn't seem desperate. When I texted her, the message was sent as a text message, indicating this person wasn't using the iMessage app. I said hey once again. She replied, "Hey, come now," and then pasted an address. The address was 5 miles from my house, or 10 minutes, which wasn't bad at all. I told her I'm on my way. Before leaving, I told my mom I was going out and left. The address was on the quieter side of town, not necessarily a nice kind of quiet. I pulled up to the house. It had a decent location privacy-wise. Across the street were one of those huge pieces of land surrounded by trees that was dug out deep to collect water during rainfall, and the neighboring houses were kind of spaced out. A red flag went off in my head when I noticed 2 cars in the driveway. I texted her saying I was there, and she replied, "KK, go around back, the front door is loud." I replied, "Are your parents home or something?" But she didn't answer this time. I got out of the car and slowly walked around the house, noticing there was no fence to separate the front yard from the back. There was a window on the side of the house, and as I passed it, I realized there was an opening in the blinds. Someone was holding it up. But as soon as I noticed, the blinds fell back into place. I texted her again, saying, "Was that you at the window?" No response. This was a little creepy now. I continued walking slowly to the backyard, thinking that I could hear sounds coming from back there. For example, the brief sound of a yard chair scraping against the concrete. I became so nervous to turn that corner into the backyard that I froze at the edge of the brick wall, and just ever so gradually poked my head around the corner to see if anyone was in the backyard. As far as I could tell, nobody was back there. So I walked to the back door. It was a really old sliding glass door, so I could partially see into the house. Another thing I realized just then that raised more red flags: not a single light was on in the house. You know what, I told myself I'd text her one more time, and if she didn't respond, I was out of there. I took out my phone and texted her, saying, "I'm at the back door, where are you?" She responded within 10 seconds, saying, "Come in." I wasn't comfortable entering that house. I decided to call her for the first time, but after entering the number, the screen said "Text Now audio call." Text Now is one of those iPhone apps that allow you to use a fake phone number for calls and texts. That meant this whole time, whoever this was using a fake phone number. However, the most disturbing part of this was when I heard the sound of a ringtone coming from right behind the glass door, as if somebody were leaning against the wall, hiding. And now as I looked more closely into the house, I could see the glow from a phone screen right next to the door, which confirmed that somebody was hiding there. I didn't run. I tried to draw as little attention as possible by simply walking back around the house in the opposite direction I came from to avoid being seen through the door. When I was out of possible view, I ran full speed to my car and drove home. I didn't check my texts until I got back home. I had 15 new messages waiting for me, about 12 of them asking, "Where'd you go? Why'd you leave? Come back," and so on. The last 3 were more disturbing though. The first of the last 3 messages said, "I'm not actually a 20-year-old girl, but I'm sure you figured that out by now." The next one was, "No laws were broken, LOL, good luck." And the last one was, "I know exactly what you look like and I have your number." I blocked his fake number and went to report and unmatch him on Tinder, but he had already done that. The whole thing was something straight out of a nightmare, but luckily I never got any calls or texts from anyone suspicious, and I was able to forget about it quickly. I've used Tinder a few times since then, but just for fun. I've never actually made an effort to go out and meet anyone from the app ever again. I was 14, 8th grade, last year of middle school. I had to go, so I got up from my seat in math class, took the wooden plank that was supposed to be the bathroom pass, and strolled through the hallways to the bathroom. The bathroom on the main floor had a sign on it saying out of order, use upstairs or downstairs bathroom. A random older guy walked up to me and asked with a smile on his face if I knew where the nearest bathroom was. I told him yeah, either upstairs or downstairs. He thanked me and walked to the stairs. So to avoid more potential conversation with the guy, I went down. I wondered who that guy could be. Definitely not staff. Maybe a parent. I went down to the lower level, which was literally only for bathrooms and extra locker rooms for the sport teams. I opened the door to the bathroom. The light was off, as usual for this bathroom since it was the least used one. I went to the stall and shut the door. I covered the toilet seat with paper and sat down. Suddenly, there was a white light flashing in the bathroom, and I heard the sound of the fire alarm outside of the bathroom. It was a fire drill. My heart dropped because I didn't know what to do. It was the first fire drill of the year. Would I get away with just using the bathroom while everyone else was outside? At this point, I figured I'd just do it. The flashing light got a bit annoying, as did the alarm coming from outside. Suddenly, the alarm got much louder. Then I realized it was because the door opened, and over came marching somebody right to my stall door. I saw their feet underneath the stall. I thought for sure it was a teacher coming to check the room for any students. They didn't say anything though. I didn't know if I should say something or not. I looked at their shoes. They were just facing the door. But I noticed they weren't just standing there. I saw through that dreaded 1-inch crack of the stall door that everybody hates, someone's face pressed up against it. Most apparently, a man's eye, open as wide as possible. Then there was a chuckle from the other side. I was breathing heavily now, heart racing too. I didn't know if I should scream or not. Then, the person got on his knees and stuck his head underneath the stall to look at me. It was that man from the hallway. When he saw it was me, he literally crawled under the door and into the stall and grabbed a hold of me, covering my mouth first thing. I remember he said things like, "Don't struggle and just relax." I didn't know what he was going to do to me. It was an unreal feeling, like my life was flashing before my eyes at such a young age, an age that you think you're invincible. Then, the fire alarm got louder again as the door opened. It was the principal's voice. "Is anybody in here?" I screamed, and though muffled through the man's hand, the principal heard it and came rushing over to the stall trying to open it. He screamed to open the door. The man let go of me, opened the door in the principal's face, and ran for it. The principal was a very old man, so he didn't chase after him. The school also didn't have cameras at this point, so as far as I know, the guy got away. The principal actually hugged me and was very emotional, telling me to come with him so we could call my parents. All my friends saw me almost in tears walking with my parents to their car. It was humiliating, but I was also just happy. The principal saw the man pull the fire alarm and run downstairs, so he slowly but surely made his way down there and checked the bathroom first thing. He unfortunately passed away 5 years ago. I still have great appreciation for that principal. He was my hero in a certain way. I'm the oldest of 4, and during the events of this story, I was 16, my younger sister was 11, and my 2 younger brothers were 8 and 7. My parents and their group of friends were a part of a club that was basically for rich, snobby people. The club always hosted a Christmas party one night in December each year at a big fancy firehouse. Of course, for all the younger kids, like my siblings, somebody would always dress up as Santa Claus and hand out the presents that were left in a sack by a chair, which had a red blanket over it. This year, my dad's best friend Michael was dressing up as Santa. He was sitting at the same table as us, so when the time came for him to leave and get changed into the Santa suit, I saw him get up and walk out the door. There were like 20 young kids there, they never noticed. Everyone was having a good time, chatting and whatnot, kids playing on the floor in the center of the room. When the door to the firehouse opened and bells were heard jingling, All the kids jumped up yelling Santa, and in came Michael in a surprisingly unimpressive Santa costume. It honestly looked like the cheapest thing he could find at Party City. A serious downgrade from last year. The hat and the beard were alright, but the costume just seemed cheap. Not the usual costume the club supplied. He chuckled and did his best Santa impression. I had to say, he was doing a really good job of changing his voice though. I saw a few of my parents' friends whispering to each other. Michael grabbed the bag of gifts and said in his best Santa voice he'd be right back with the presents. He sounded so different though. He walked out the door with the bag of gifts. That's when my dad and a couple other guys ran after him yelling, "Hey." I still didn't know what was going on. Not until my mom told me that wasn't Michael. I wanted to feel important, I guess, so I ran outside to the parking lot as well, where I found my dad and two other guys standing there, looking around dumbfounded. The man dressed as Santa was gone. The real thing they were concerned about was where Michael was. Michael's car was also missing. I asked them if they were sure that wasn't Michael. They were all positive though. We tried calling Michael, but his phone was off. We tried his house phone after a while too, which went to voicemail. We had to send a search party, but we couldn't find him anywhere though. Eventually my dad and I returned to the firehouse to pick up my mom and siblings. Just about everyone went home by then. I waited outside. I heard a scream for help in the distance. It came from the woods, deep in the woods. I ran to the tree line to scream back Michael's name. He yelled back help again. It was him. I was too excited to go back for my dad, so I ran into the woods following his screams for help, and I found him, tied to a tree in a bloody mess. Blood was dripping from his forehead down to his face. He looked like he'd been beaten by a blunt object. I cut the little rope with my key, and he struggled to his feet. I walked him back to the parking lot, and he screamed when he saw his car was gone. When Michael left the building planning to get changed into the Santa costume, he was jumped by 3 guys wearing masks, one of whom struck him in the forehead with something metal repeatedly until he was knocked out. Next thing he knew, he woke up tied to a tree in the woods. It's sick to think that 3 or 4 men could have set up a plan like this, involving harming somebody just to steal a bunch of gifts from children, some of them pretty expensive. And to add insult to injury, they stole Michael's $50,000 car. I felt terrible for him, and I still do. It's not the kind of story that he can just bring up for fun. It's still a painful story to tell. Even for me.
Mary Virginia Carpenter was a 21-year-old girl from Texarkana, Texas, who went missing in Denton in the summer of 1948. She was last seen by a taxi driver around 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 1st, 1948. She left her home in Texarkana and took a train to Denton, 6 hours away. At the station, she took a taxi to the Texas Women's University, where she was planning to complete a summer term. She transferred from the University of Arkansas after she decided she wanted to enter a different career field. Mary first enrolled in the Texas Women's University during the 1945 to 1946 school year, and then took a break from school to help her mother who had fallen ill and to save money. Mary once again enrolled in the school for the 1948 summer term, where she planned to begin training as a laboratory technician in the autumn, but she disappeared just before the summer term began. The cab driver who had seen her last, Edgar Ray Zachary, later stated he stopped in front of Brackenridge Hall, a building on campus, at 9 p.m., and Mary gave him a ticket for her trunk and paid him $1 so he would pick it up for her from the train station the next day. Edgar stated that after she got out of the taxi, Mary approached 2 young men standing near a yellow convertible that he believed to be a Pontiac. Edgar stated that one of the men were tall and the other one was chunky. Mary approached the men as if she knew them and began to speak to them, and Edgar, assuming they were just her friends, drove away. She never checked into her dorm in Brackenridge Hall, and was never seen or heard from again after this moment. Some of Mary's former boyfriends stated she became infatuated easily, and speculated that she ran away with a lover, but her family did not believe that she would leave without telling them, as Mary was very close with her family, and it would just be completely out of character. She had previously been engaged, but broke off the relationship just weeks prior to the wedding. Police zeroed in on her boyfriend Kenny Branham and the cab driver Edgar. Kenny passed the polygraph tests and insisted that Mary would have no reason to run away.
She didn't have a lover coaxing her to run off, no jealous exes, no wishes to leave her life behind. Kenny was also the first to report Mary missing to her mother, making his involvement unlikely. On top of that, Mary was looking forward to starting her semester at college. This led investigators to conclude that she had been taken. Police shifted their attention to Edgar and learned he had a record for petty crimes and a reputation for being abusive. He was charged with attempted rape in 1957, but the charge was dropped after the victim asked authorities not to prosecute. Edgar's wife stated he had been home with her from 10 p.m. onwards on the day Mary disappeared, but 10 years after her disappearance, his wife told police she lied to them, and her husband had not actually arrived home until 2 or 3 a.m. that night. Edgar died in 1984. He was never charged in connection with Mary's case, but he remains a suspect, although he did pass 2 polygraph tests in her case. In the winter and spring of 1946, 5 people were murdered in Lovers Lanes in Mary's hometown of Texarkana. Lovers Lane is a secluded area where people kiss or engage in sexual activity in their vehicles. This meant all 5 victims were young, around Mary's age. The crimes are believed to have all been committed by the same person. The murderer was never caught and became known as the Texarkana Phantom Killer. Mary was actually well acquainted with 3 of the killer's victims, creating suspicion that her case was linked with these murders, but police found no evidence to support this theory. In 1998, police received a tip that 2 men had raped and killed Mary shortly after her disappearance and buried her body in a dam at a stock tank near the Texas Women's University campus. The suspects were both deceased by this time, however. Police investigated this dam based on the information, but uncovered no evidence. Numerous leads and possible sightings of Mary have surfaced throughout the decades, but no solid evidence has been uncovered. Both of Mary's parents have passed away, and she was an only child, but her 3 cousins still hope to find closure in this case one day.
I have a preserve by my house since we live in a highly populated suburban area and there isn't much green. It's a huge preserve with miles and miles worth of biking and hiking trails. So long story short, one night in 2016 at like 11 at night, I decided to go for a run. I'm weird in the sense that I like to avoid people when I go for runs. That's just how I am. I held my phone with a tight grip with the flashlight on and started my run at the edge of the preserve onto the dirt hiking trail. I felt I had more energy running at night too. It was weird, I don't know how to describe it. There were no lights at all, it was all just nature. There was also a dead body that came up in the previous week in the preserve, but I didn't really let that concern me too much since I live in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. It was also a weeknight, so there was literally no one else in this preserve but me. Well, that's at least what I thought. I got tired after about 10 minutes of running. Yeah, I used to be out of shape. I had to catch my breath, so the first bench I found, I sat down on. I have to admit, it was creepy as hell being in a pitch black preserve like that all alone. It feels the same as being alone in the middle of the forest. There were weird sounds coming from all around, and to be quite honest with you, it was scaring me. Of course, most of them were animals, so when I heard leaves and sticks crunching nearby, I assumed it was a raccoon or fox or something. But anyone's worst nightmare came true when I noticed something tall hiding behind one of the trees. I couldn't quite tell what it was because an iPhone's flashlight is only so bright. I stood up and walked a little closer, and I was kind of doing a crouch walk because for some reason I thought that would make me more low-key. I got close enough to where I saw a hand wrapped around one of the trees. The hand was in a white glove though. I felt like my heart sank. Like I was suddenly in a life or death situation before I could even see who was behind that tree. Then they finally decided to reveal themselves. Someone dressed as a clown stepped into the range of my flashlight. I wanted to wait until now to mention this was back during the clown epidemic in 2016. From what I could see in the little light I had, this person went all out with his clown costume, from the makeup right down to the clown shoes. The most disturbing part was the bat with a large foot-long spike wedged through it that he was holding. His head was angled down to give a more menacing, terrifying look, and he walked very slowly towards me. I had only one option, and that was to run as fast as I could, even though I was already so tired. I didn't run on the trail. Instead, I ran into the woods until I felt like I was going to puke. Then I shut off the flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. I heard running zoom past me maybe 10 feet away. When the footsteps faded away into the distance, I ran back to the trail and ran all the way back the way I came. And I actually puked by the time I made it to the street just from running so much. I didn't mention it before, but everyone figured that the dead body found the week before was linked to the clown epidemic. It should go without saying I stayed away from the preserve for a while, and I definitely never went in there past dark ever again. After breaking up with my first girlfriend when I was 21, I had been single for about a year. It was the first time I had been single in years, so it took some getting used to again. Eventually I decided it was time to get back into the dating scene, so I started downloading a bunch of dating apps. One of the apps I downloaded was OkCupid, which was the one I used the most. I vibed the most with one girl I matched with named Brenna. Based on her interests and biography, she was into a lot of things I was into. She was a very pretty, light-skinned black girl. We had talked for a while and agreed that I would pick her up at her place to go out and get food. I pulled up to her house on the west side of town at 6:30. It was about 10 minutes after sunset, so it was really getting dark. I texted Brenna, and she took a while to answer. I sat in my car actually staring at the conversation for a while, waiting for the texting bubble to come up. When it finally did, she responded saying, "Hey, sorry about that. My brother's going to meet you outside. He's being really annoying and protective." I showed her how upset I was and how much I didn't want to have to meet her brother, but she just kept saying, "Sorry, he's forcing me." I saw the front door of the house I was parked in front of open, and a guy came out walking over to the driveway while looking at my car. I got out to go over and meet him, realizing he towered over me. Another thing I quickly noted was his skin was significantly more dark than Brenna's, to the point that they wouldn't even seem related at all. He shook my hand and introduced himself as Will. There didn't seem to be anything off-putting about him at first glance, and he seemed friendly enough. He started going on about how he just wanted to make sure a trustworthy, stand-up guy was about to take out his sister. We talked for a little, and he seemed normal enough, I guess. He finally asked me to come inside to meet Brenna. He led me into the house and shut the door behind me. He told me to wait right there in the living room while he went upstairs to get Brenna. As he went upstairs, I looked into the living room to realize there were two men sitting on the couch, both giving me a certain kind of look I just didn't like. I said what's up to them. One of them just slightly nodded his head, but just barely. Will from upstairs called down that he's trying to find Brenna, which was odd. I turned to look at the room adjacent to the living room, which was the dining room. To my surprise, there was another man sitting at the dining room table, also staring at me. Instinctively, I stepped back and reached for the doorknob without even turning my back to the three men. One of them screamed, "Grab him," as they saw me reach for the door. At that point, I flung the door open and ran to my car. They weren't far behind. In fact, I made it into my car with only maybe a second to spare before they were outside my doors, kicking and hitting my windows, trying to break them. I was able to drive away down the block, but keep in mind this was on a public residential road. I have no idea how it didn't cause more of a scene out on the street. I made it home to tell my mom and dad what happened, still out of breath. They were in shock and almost didn't believe it, and they recommended I call the police. I did. I reported the house and the incident to the police. One of the neighbors vouched for my story anonymously because they saw the group attacking my car when I escaped. Police arrested 3 of the 4 men I saw in the house, one of them being Will, or whatever his real name was. The other guy couldn't be found or identified. I didn't stop using dating apps after that. I was just a lot more cautious from there on.